In a single, breathtaking moment, the air itself seemed to shimmer with a secret, an intoxicating blend of mystery and allure that struck me like a bolt of lightning. She wore a new perfume, a scent so vivid and unspoken that it immediately seized my every thought. Its notes were delicate yet defiant, whispering promises of hidden desires and uncharted passions. I couldn't help but wonder, who was the intended recipient of this silent, irresistible invitation? That very question, heavy with the weight of unvoiced confessions, set my heart racing and my mind ablaze with curiosity. I first noticed it on a cool autumn morning when the sunlight filtered through the cafe's windows and danced upon her delicate features. We had met casually, as we often did, exchanging pleasantries and small talk about the weather and our favorite books. But that day, something was different. The familiar scent that once reminded me of rain-drenched earth and quiet hope had been replaced by an unfamiliar fragrance, a perfume that was both enchanting and enigmatic. It was as if she had decided, without a word, to reinvent herself with every subtle spritz. I remember sitting across from her, watching as she delicately dabbed the new fragrance onto her pulse points. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a sense of intimacy that she reserved only for moments of deep personal significance. My mind, always prone to wander, began to conjure images of secret admirers and clandestine rendezvous. The scent seemed to swirl around her like a whispered secret, one that she guarded fiercely by never uttering a single word about it. And so, my imagination took flight. Over the following days, I became increasingly obsessed with deciphering the enigma of her new perfume. Every time I caught a fleeting glimpse of her, whether in the corridor of our shared workplace or in the crowded hum of the city streets, that mysterious fragrance would envelop her like a second skin. I would lean in subtly, trying to catch every nuance of its composition, hints of citrus, a soft trace of jasmine, and an underlying warmth that I couldn't quite place. The allure of the scent was impossible to ignore, and with every encounter, I felt as if I were piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed our chance meetings, I found myself replaying our conversations in my mind. I analyzed every smile, every fleeting glance, and every pause in her speech. There was a depth to her eyes that I had always admired, but now, I sensed that something was hidden behind them, a secret she held close, like a cherished treasure. I wondered if this perfume was a clue to her inner world, a hint at a chapter of her life that she had never revealed. The silence surrounding it was deafening, and in that silence, my curiosity blossomed into a persistent, almost desperate need to know the truth. I began to ask subtle questions, weaving the topic into our everyday interactions without arousing suspicion. I noticed a new scent on you lately, I'd say, offering a casual compliment as if admiring a piece of art. Yet, each time I broached the subject, she would merely smile, a small, enigmatic smile that offered no explanation. It was as if the perfume were a sacred emblem of her autonomy, a personal secret meant to remain shrouded in mystery. Despite my attempts, she never mentioned why she had chosen that fragrance, or whom it might be intended for. That silence, rather than quelling my intrigue, only deepened it. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly drawn into a silent investigation. I started to notice subtle shifts in her behavior, a fleeting tension in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, a slight hesitation before answering personal questions, and an unusual frequency of phone calls that she excused with vague comments about work matters. Each little detail added layers to the mystery. I began to suspect that the perfume was not merely an aesthetic choice but a deliberate signal, a marker of an emotional or romantic truth that she was keeping hidden. One rainy evening, after an unexpectedly long day at work, I decided to follow her from a distance. The city was slick with rain, the neon lights of storefronts and street lamps casting reflections onto the wet pavement. I trailed her discreetly as she made her way through winding side streets and quiet neighborhoods, always keeping a respectful distance yet unable to break away from the magnetic pull of her presence. My heart pounded with the thrill of the pursuit, mixed with the dread of what I might uncover. It was then, beneath the sparse glow of a streetlight, that I saw her pause in front of a modest apartment building, a place that radiated a kind of secret intimacy. I lingered in the shadows, hidden from view as she rang the buzzer at an apartment door. For several moments, time seemed to slow, and I watched with bated breath as the door opened. I couldn't see the face that greeted her, but I could hear a soft murmur of words, warm, familiar, and intimate. It was then that I realized, the new perfume was not for me, nor was it a signal of some whimsical reinvention. It was an olfactory signature for someone else, someone whose presence in her life was both significant and deeply personal. The revelation sent my mind spiraling into a vortex of conflicting emotions. There was a sting of jealousy, a surge of betrayal that threatened to overwhelm me. I had always considered myself patient and understanding, yet the sudden awareness that she had been cultivating a secret connection felt like a personal rejection. The scent that had initially captivated me now stung with the bitterness of unspoken truths and hidden affections. I grappled with a cascade of thoughts. Had I been blind to the signs all along? Was I merely a passive observer of a love story in which I had no role? My heart ached with the realization that the woman I thought I knew had been concealing a part of herself, a part that she reserved only for someone else. The silent mystery of her new perfume had unraveled into a tapestry of longing and selective secrecy, a tapestry that I had been left to decipher alone. In the quiet that followed that fateful night, I questioned the very nature of our relationship, the authenticity of every shared smile, every intimate conversation that I had once treasured. The discovery left me with an aching void, a painful awareness that love can sometimes be as elusive and fleeting as the scent of a perfume that lingers long after its wearer has passed by. Yet even as I wrestled with these turbulent emotions, a part of me couldn't help but admire her, for her capacity to keep such a secret, for the grace with which she guarded her private world. In that moment, I resolved that the truth must be understood, not just for the sake of my own wounded pride, but for the possibility of rediscovering the deeper layers of our connection. I had to confront her, to ask her about the mystery that now defined so much of my every thought. But the path to that confrontation was fraught with uncertainty, and I found myself teetering between the need for clarity and the fear of irrevocable change. In the following days, the scent of that new perfume seemed to follow me like an echo, haunting the spaces we once shared. Every time I caught a whiff of it, I was transported back to that rainy evening, to the soft murmur at the apartment door, to the unspoken realization that I was not the only one who held her heart. I began to notice small details, an extra layer of lipstick that matched the subtle notes of her perfume, a lingering touch of her fragrance on the collar of her coat, that confirmed my suspicions. The evidence was scattered like fragments of a forgotten dream, each piece pointing to a narrative of passion and secrecy that I had never anticipated. As I sat one evening alone in my small apartment, the soft hum of the city outside mingling with the quiet rhythm of my thoughts, I decided that I could no longer live in the haze of uncertainty. With trembling determination, I resolved to confront the mystery head-on. I drafted messages in my mind, rehearsed the conversation over and over, and steeled myself for the possibility that my discovery might shatter the fragile balance we had maintained. I knew that whatever the outcome, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and introspection. I watched her from a distance, trying to capture the moments when her facade would slip, a fleeting sigh, a hidden glance, a subtle change in tone that betrayed her inner turmoil. The mystery of the perfume was no longer just about scent, it had become a symbol of all the things that lay hidden beneath the surface of our relationship. In every shared moment, I searched for clues, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense of the conflicting emotions swirling inside me. Finally, one evening as twilight bled into night and the city's pulse slowed to a gentle murmur, I found the courage to ask her the question that had haunted me. In the quiet intimacy of our favorite park, where the soft rustle of leaves provided a muted soundtrack, I looked into her eyes, those eyes that had once been a sanctuary of trust, and asked, with a voice that trembled with both hope and trepidation, "Who is it that you're wearing that perfume for?" Her face paled for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, regret, perhaps, or resignation. She hesitated, as if measuring the weight of her words before allowing them to escape. And in that long, suspended pause, I felt the fragile threads of our connection straining under the pressure of truth. The silence was a chasm between us, filled with the echoes of unspoken confessions and lost opportunities. I braced myself for the answer that would either mend our broken trust or shatter it beyond repair. The park's twilight silence stretched interminably as her eyes faltered, caught in the gravity of the question I had so hesitantly posed. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and I felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on us. Finally, with a trembling exhale, she whispered, "It's for someone I can't hide anymore." Her voice, barely audible over the rustle of autumn leaves, was laced with an emotion I couldn't immediately decipher. Was it sorrow, guilt, or something altogether different? Her confession sent a shockwave through my already fragile heart. I stared at her, searching her face for answers, trying to gauge the depth of the betrayal I felt but also the pain that must have driven her to conceal such a truth. "Who?" I managed to choke out, each syllable heavy with disbelief. Her gaze dropped, and she began to speak haltingly, as if each word was a shard of glass threatening to cut her open. It's not something I planned," she murmured, her eyes glistening in the failing light. "I never meant to hurt you. I met someone who makes me feel alive in ways I never expected." I didn't know how to tell you, or how to explain it without shattering everything. The confession was raw, laden with remorse and a desperate need to be understood, yet it failed to quell the storm inside me. I felt betrayed and confused, a cocktail of emotions that blurred the lines between anger and sorrow. As she spoke, I felt my pulse quicken, my thoughts swirling in a maelstrom of past memories and present despair. I recalled the first time I noticed her subtle changes, a hesitation before returning my affectionate greeting, the way her eyes darted away when we were alone, as if guarding some unspeakable secret. I remembered the nights I lay awake, wondering if there was something in her tone or the inflection of her laughter that hinted at a hidden life. Now, with her words hanging in the cold air, all those suspicions converged into a single, painful realization. The conversation that followed was one of halting explanations and tearful admissions. She told me of a chance encounter, a meeting that began innocently at a mutual friends gathering, where laughter and conversation slowly gave way to a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. With every detail she reluctantly shared, I felt the floor beneath me crumble further. It was as if the very essence of who I believed she was had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing familiar remained. I listened, numb and yet acutely aware of every nuance in her tone. She spoke of feeling invisible, of years spent suppressing desires that I, caught up in the comfort of routine, had never even suspected. I could see her inner conflict, the battle between the woman who had once promised unwavering fidelity and the one who was now admitting to a secret life that had been cultivated in the shadows. The scent, the new perfume, had become a symbol of that hidden passion, an olfactory reminder of the person she had longed to be, even if only for fleeting moments. When she paused, our eyes met for a long, painful minute. I felt an internal struggle, torn between the urge to lash out and the desperate hope that somehow, in some way, we could salvage what was left of our connection. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked, my voice raw with the pain of abandonment. "Weren't we supposed to share everything?" Her silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft sigh that escaped her lips. "I was scared," she admitted at last, her voice quivering. "Scared of losing you, scared of losing myself, and scared that once I let you see this part of me, everything would change. I didn't want to hurt you. I lost myself in the process." Every word cut deeper than the last. The woman I loved had built an impenetrable wall around her innermost feelings, and I had always assumed that wall was for protection, from the outside world. Now I realized that it had also shielded her from being truly seen by the person who mattered most. The hurt was immense, a raw, pulsating pain that echoed with every memory of our past intimacy. I felt as though the air had turned to stone around us, heavy with the unspoken truth that nothing would ever be the same again. We walked in silence for what felt like hours after that conversation, our steps measured and our hearts laden with the gravity of our unraveling lives. The pathway through the park, usually a place of solace and quiet reflection, now seemed like a cruel metaphor for the distance that had grown between us. I couldn't help but replay every moment in my head, the way her hand trembled as she confessed, the flicker of remorse in her eyes, the overwhelming certainty in my own heart that I had been left on the outside of her truth. In the days that followed, I found myself oscillating between despair and a numbing sense of resignation. I withdrew into myself, seeking refuge in the solitude of my own thoughts, trying desperately to make sense of the betrayal. My every sense was attuned to the memory of that new perfume, the way it lingered in the air like a ghost of secrets, a haunting reminder of the intimacy she had shared with someone else. Every time I caught its subtle hint, it was as though the universe were forcing me to relive that fateful moment over and over again. I spent long, sleepless nights grappling with the enormity of what had happened. The familiar spaces in our home transformed into battlegrounds of memories, every room echoing with voices from the past. I found myself poring over old photographs, trying to decipher the point at which our path had diverged from the one I thought we were walking together. Was it that unguarded smile during a dinner party, or perhaps the subtle shift in her tone during our quiet evenings at home? Each memory was now tainted by the knowledge that a part of her had always belonged to someone else. Desperation gave way to a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I knew that if I was to survive this betrayal, I had to confront not only her secrets but also the fractures within myself that had allowed this deception to flourish unnoticed. I began to question my own shortcomings. Had I been so complacent in our daily routines that I failed to notice the cracks forming in the foundation of our relationship? Was my own fear of vulnerability a barrier that prevented me from truly understanding her? These questions haunted me like specters, each one a painful reminder of my own human frailties. In an attempt to find clarity, I reached out to a close friend, a person who had always been a steadfast pillar of support in times of turmoil. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, I poured out my heart, recounting every detail of the confrontation and the myriad emotions that had since consumed me. My friend listened intently, offering neither judgment nor empty reassurances, but simply a compassionate presence that allowed me to process the raw intensity of my feelings. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the truth is too heavy to carry alone. But remember, you're not defined by someone else's secrets. You're defined by your own strength to face them head-on." Her words, though simple, struck a chord deep within me. I realized that my identity had long been intertwined with the narrative of our shared past, that I had allowed our story to eclipse the person I was on my own. It was time to reclaim my own truth, to find solace in the understanding that betrayal, as devastating as it was, did not render me unworthy of love or happiness. Yet the path to that realization was anything but linear. I decided to confront the situation head-on, not with anger but with a determination to understand the full spectrum of emotions that had led us to this painful juncture. One evening, I sat her down in the quiet of our living room, a space that now felt as alien as it was familiar. The room, lit by the soft glow of a solitary lamp, was heavy with the unspoken words of our recent confession. "I need to know everything," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I need to understand how you feel, what led you to this point, and whether there's any chance we can mend what's broken." Her eyes filled with tears as she hesitated, the burden of the secret finally spilling over into a torrent of emotions. She began to recount the events leading up to that fateful encounter, how loneliness and a sense of neglect had crept into her heart, how a fleeting conversation at a social gathering had ignited a spark that she hadn't felt in years, and how that spark had slowly fanned into a flame that threatened to consume her. With every word, I felt the sharp sting of realization. We had both contributed to the distance between us, though in very different ways. Her vulnerability in admitting her mistakes was painful to witness, yet it also held the promise of redemption, a chance to rebuild what had been fractured by silence and secrecy. As the night wore on, our conversation meandered through painful recollections and tentative hopes. There were moments of bitter regret, interspersed with fragile expressions of love that still lingered between us. I listened as she confessed that the new perfume was not just an attempt at reinvention, it was an effort to recapture a part of herself that she felt had been lost in the daily grind of our life together. It was an act of desperation, a silent cry for a renewal of passion that had long since been smothered by routine and neglect. I found myself torn between empathy for her internal struggle and the raw ache of my own wounded pride. The realization that she had sought solace and affirmation in the arms of another was almost too much to bear, yet I also recognized that her actions were not born solely out of malice, but rather a profound loneliness that we had both allowed to fester. As she spoke, I felt the old memories, the laughter we once shared, the dreams we had whispered to each other in the quiet of midnight, intermingling with the bitter tang of betrayal. In the days that followed our long, painful conversation, I began to see our lives with a new clarity. I realized that the truth of our relationship was not as simple as right or wrong, but rather a complex interplay of emotions, unspoken needs, and the inevitable human longing for connection. I resolved that the path forward would not be paved with anger or regret alone, it would require introspection, forgiveness, and an honest reckoning with our own vulnerabilities. Determined to find a way to heal, I immersed myself in the process of self-discovery. I returned to old hobbies that had once brought me joy, the long walks along the river, the solitary hours spent writing in a weathered journal, and the quiet contemplation of art in a local gallery. With each new day, I began to stitch together the tattered remnants of my identity, slowly reclaiming the parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the weight of our shared past. I even began to explore the possibility of counseling, both individually and as a couple, in the hope that professional guidance might help us navigate the labyrinth of our emotions. Yet even as I embarked on this journey of healing, the ghost of that elusive perfume lingered, a constant reminder of a secret that had irrevocably altered the course of our lives. Its scent, once a symbol of mystery and allure, now carried with it the bittersweet taste of memories, of love lost, trust broken, and the painful, yet necessary, evolution of two souls forced to confront their own truths. I knew that the road ahead would be arduous and uncertain, but I also recognized that it held the promise of a deeper, more authentic understanding of who we were, both as individuals and as partners. As dusk settled over the city once more, I found myself standing on the threshold of a future that was as uncharted as it was inevitable. The conversation in that quiet living room had laid bare our innermost fears and desires, exposing the raw, unfiltered reality of our shared life. And while the revelations had left scars that would take time to heal, they had also opened a door, a chance for redemption, for growth, and perhaps even for a rekindled love that had been tested by fire. In that delicate balance between sorrow and hope, I began to understand that the true measure of our connection was not in the perfection of our past, but in our willingness to confront the imperfections of our present. I resolved to move forward with an open heart, prepared to rebuild trust piece by piece, and to honor the truth that had been revealed by a simple, unspoken scent. The journey would be long and fraught with uncertainty, but it was a path I was willing to tread, one that promised not an end to the pain, but the beginning of a transformation that could lead to something richer, more resilient, and ultimately, more human. In the echo of that final confession, as the world around me blurred into shadows and uncertain light, I found myself standing at the precipice of an entirely new beginning. The night air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain, a silent witness to the shattering of old illusions and the dawning of raw, uncharted truth. In that suspended moment, every heartbeat roared with both grief and defiance, and the world seemed to whisper promises of rebirth. I knew then that the pain of betrayal was not an end, but the painful, transformative prelude to discovering who I was meant to become. In the aftermath of that fateful evening, life transformed into a kaleidoscope of emotions, each twist revealing fragments of myself I had long buried. The words she had uttered that night still reverberated in the quiet corners of my mind, the confession of secret longings, the admission of a love that had flourished in the shadows. I spent countless hours alone in my apartment, the silence punctuated by the soft hum of city life beyond my window, questioning the nature of desire and trust. I realized that her clandestine act, symbolized by that elusive new perfume, had been as much about her own struggle with identity as it was about our failing bond. 4 days, I wandered aimlessly through familiar streets, my thoughts as tangled as the ivy climbing the old brick facades of our city. I visited the park where we once strolled hand in hand, its paths now holding the bittersweet residue of memories and what ifs. Every rustle of the wind, every play of light through the trees, seemed to murmur echoes of laughter and whispered secrets that were no more. I sat on a weathered bench under a canopy of golden leaves, replaying the conversation in my head, the tremor in her voice, the regret in her eyes, and felt an overwhelming urge to understand not just her choices, but my own role in the unraveling of our intimacy. I embarked on a journey of self-reflection, one that forced me to confront the parts of my soul I had long neglected. I began writing feverishly in a journal, pouring my heart onto paper in an effort to capture the myriad emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Each word was both a release and a revelation, a candid testament to the tumult of loss, anger, and an emerging resolve. I recalled moments from our early days, when love had been vibrant and effortless, and contrasted them with the stark, painful reality of recent events. In doing so, I began to see that the love we once shared had been built on shifting sands, fragile promises and unspoken expectations that crumbled under the weight of time and unmet needs. As the weeks turned into months, I sought solace in therapy and in the honest confessions of close friends who had borne witness to my despair. I attended support groups where strangers recounted similar tales of heartbreak, each story a mirror reflecting the resilience that lay hidden within their wounds. In these shared spaces of vulnerability, I found strength in the knowledge that I was not alone in my suffering. I learned that forgiveness, of both her and myself, was not an act of condoning the betrayal, but a necessary step toward healing. I began to forgive myself for the times I had overlooked the subtle signs of discontent, for the moments I had chosen ignorance over inquiry. In accepting my own imperfections, I slowly untangled the knots of bitterness that had bound my heart. In a surprising twist of fate, the passage of time softened the sting of betrayal and allowed me to see the beauty in life's perpetual cycle of endings and beginnings. I threw myself into new passions, long, solitary hikes that led me to the serene edges of nature, evenings spent at art exhibits where the colors and forms stirred my soul, and nights immersed in the mellifluous strains of music that spoke of loss and redemption. Each of these experiences became a stepping stone toward reclaiming my identity, a reminder that I was more than the sum of my past heartbreak. One crisp morning, while sipping coffee in a quaint little bistro that overlooked the awakening city, I encountered a stranger whose presence was at once unassuming and profoundly reassuring. He carried the air of someone who had also navigated the turbulent waters of betrayal and emerged with wisdom etched into every line on his face. We spoke casually at first, about the weather, the vibrancy of the city, and the unpredictable nature of life. Yet, as our conversation deepened, I found myself sharing fragments of my own journey, the raw details of love lost and the gradual, painful process of self-discovery. His empathetic gaze and gentle words of encouragement reminded me that life's most profound transformations often arise from the crucible of suffering. In the months that followed, I began to reimagine what love could be, not as a singular, all-consuming force, but as a tapestry of shared experiences, mutual growth, and genuine respect for one another's vulnerabilities. I reconnected with her on a level that transcended the confines of our past relationship, approaching our encounters with cautious curiosity rather than the desperate need for validation. Our conversations, though fraught with the weight of previous betrayals, slowly evolved into honest dialogues about our hopes, our regrets, and the lessons we had learned along the way. While the pain of that new perfume and its hidden meaning still lingered like a bittersweet fragrance in my memory, it had also become a symbol of the complexities of the human heart, of the secrets we harbor and the courage it takes to confront them. Yet, even as I navigated this delicate new terrain, there were moments when the ghost of that night would return unbidden, a sudden whiff of a familiar scent, a stray comment that recalled our lost intimacy, and the old wounds would ache anew. In those instances, I would retreat into my writing, channeling the pain into poetic expressions of longing and hope. I discovered that by embracing the full spectrum of my emotions, I could transform them into something creative and constructive. The act of creation became both a refuge and a rebellion against the forces that had once threatened to define me. I painted canvases that exploded with turbulent colors, each stroke a testament to my resilience. I composed music on a weathered guitar, the chords reverberating with the echoes of a heart that had been shattered and slowly pieced back together. In the quiet solitude of my modest apartment, I began to build a new life, a mosaic of carefully chosen moments that celebrated both the darkness and the light. I learned to savor the simple pleasures, the comfort of a well-worn book, the gentle caress of a spring breeze on my face, the soft glow of twilight that heralded the promise of tomorrow. I found that by living fully in each moment, I could honor both the pain of the past and the hope of the future. I even started exploring meditation and mindfulness, practices that taught me to sit with my emotions without judgment, to accept them as necessary parts of the human experience. Gradually, I began to understand that the new perfume, a symbol of her hidden longing and my own awakening, had irrevocably altered the trajectory of our lives. It had exposed the vulnerabilities we had both tried so hard to conceal, forcing us to confront the truths we had long evaded. And while the betrayal had left scars that would always be a part of me, it had also ignited a transformation that I now saw as a necessary rebirth. The journey toward healing was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it into a broader narrative of growth, compassion, and acceptance. One day, as summer crept into the city with its promise of warmth and renewal, I found myself revisiting the park where it had all begun. The trees were lush and vibrant, their leaves shimmering in the golden sunlight, a stark contrast to the muted hues of autumn that had once marked my descent into despair. As I sat on the same weathered bench, I reflected on the winding path that had led me from the depths of betrayal to the fragile, hopeful light of redemption. I realized that every heartbreak, every tear, had been a stepping stone to understanding not only the nature of love but also the boundless capacity for change within the human spirit. I wrote a long letter to her, a letter filled with raw honesty, gratitude, and a tentative hope for a future where we might both find solace in our newfound truths. I didn't send it, knowing that some words were meant to be a private catharsis rather than a bridge to reconciliation. In that letter, I expressed my understanding of her silent struggle, acknowledged the pain she had endured, and, most importantly, forgave her for the choices that had led us to this crossroad. I also forgave myself for the times I had failed to see the subtle signals of change, for the moments I had let complacency cloud my judgment. With time, I learned that forgiveness is not a destination but a continuous journey, a process of letting go of the heavy burdens of resentment and allowing the tender shoots of hope to emerge. I began to see that the secret of that new perfume, once a harbinger of hidden desire and betrayal, had also paved the way for a deeper understanding of our human fragility. In its elusive fragrance, I discovered the bittersweet truth that love is rarely simple, that it is often composed of paradoxes, of beauty intertwined with pain, of connection shadowed by secrecy. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a life rebuilt on the ruins of shattered dreams, I choose to embrace the complexities that define us. I acknowledge that the scars of our past will remain, etched into the tapestry of who I am, but they no longer hold me captive. Instead, they serve as reminders of the resilience that blooms in the face of adversity, of the quiet strength that emerges when we dare to confront our deepest wounds. I have learned that true healing comes not from forgetting or denying the past, but from honoring it, transforming every heartbreak into a lesson, every betrayal into a chance for rebirth. In the soft, forgiving light of dusk, I walk through the city with a newfound clarity. The once overwhelming scent of that mysterious perfume now carries with it a dual message, a reminder of a love that was lost and a beacon guiding me toward a future filled with possibility. I have come to understand that life's most painful moments often hide the seeds of renewal, that even in betrayal, there lies an invitation to grow beyond what we ever imagined. I continue to write, to paint, to sing the songs of my heart, a heart that, despite its wounds, beats with an unwavering determination to love and to live fully. And as I step forward into this uncharted future, I carry with me the memory of that secret fragrance, a symbol of both the hidden passions of the past and the transformative power of embracing our truths. In that silent, evocative scent, I found not only the evidence of a love unspoken but the courage to reclaim my own, to build a life that is richer, deeper, and infinitely more real than any illusion of perfection could ever be.